beyond the individual to a community of folks who are interested in their own spiritual development. What we're going to concentrate on is this idea of spiritual development. What does it mean to start where we are, wherever that happens to be, and to engage in a process of change, which we might call spiritual growth. Now, that is not an easy or obvious thing, although it might at first blush appear to be. Spiritual growth is something that we are not necessarily, as Jews, encouraged by the greater Jewish community to get involved in. And if we look at over the history, at least in the modern period, of Jews who have been involved in spiritual development, who are they? Well, I'm leaving aside for the second philosophical schools, which is not the same thing. Jews have been leaders in in Buddhism, in Hinduism, in all sorts of spiritual disciplines, precisely because we have perceived there to be no real place within Judaism to do that. In fact, there is a very pronounced and important place in Judaism to do that kind of work. And that's what this class is about. Now, having said that, I know I can't just jump in and start with the idea that we're going to be engaged in spiritual practice right off the bat, because for some people that is just a bridge too far at the beginning. So we are going to start with sort of a historical background. Where in Jewish literature or in Jewish history do we find the roots of what we might call a spiritual life? Where do what texts, what historical developments, what institutions have embodied this?
Can I say something?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, this isn't to answer that question, but I'm recording this and it's going to be available just for people who are signed up for the class who weren't able to come. So
okay.
I hope nobody has any objections to that. But each class will be recorded for that reason and made available just by a URL that people will have to have.
Okay. I hope that's okay with everybody. I mean, the truth is that everybody who's a part of the class, all the students who are part of the class, will have conflicting or competing obligations. And not everybody is going to be able to be present every time the group meets. So it's a matter of practicality. We have to have some way of people connecting with those, what goes on in class on those occasions when they aren't able to actually attend. But also, I think, and I don't know if this is what Kim has in mind, it's certainly something that I have in mind, sort of bouncing around in the back of things, that there is a real value in this kind of study or involvement or action or discipline for people who are Jewish and for whom the idea that being involved in spiritual life is actually something that Jews can do, and there is a real basis for doing it. That comes as a surprise, sad to say, for many. And having some sort of what's the word I'm looking for? A kind of library, if you want, of sessions or conversations that would be a source of interest to such people is one of the reasons I think why we're doing this. We're doing the class at all and recording the sessions. Okay, so to get back to where we were, so let's start with what I might call the roots of Jewish spiritual life. And these are going to be familiar to at least some of you, if not all of you, but I'm going to try to recontextualize them. From the very beginnings, Judaism was involved in spiritual discipline and a kind of life that was marked by reaching out beyond the self, starting from the self, but reaching out beyond the self to spiritual activity. We can go all the way back to Abraham, the first Jew, who already evinced that. From the very beginning, Abraham was connected with God in some ways that were new, even revolutionary in the world that he inhabited. To say that Abraham was connected to God is to point towards stories that we know. If you went to Hebrew school, you encountered the midrash somewhere along the line that Abraham's father Terach was the maker of idols, and that Abraham began his spiritual career, if you like, by breaking those idols. And when his father was upset about that, Abraham said, well, the other idols did it. What are you upset about? He said, well, idols can't do that. Idols don't have any real power. So there was already a discontinuity between the world that Abraham inhabited and what Abraham was looking for, that there was something larger and more significant that was to be found in life, and that it was not to be found in the standard sort of spiritual activity that was available. I want to mention with regard to Abraham, that Abraham begins, because we're dealing with that story with Midrash, but in terms of the biblical text, what is the first thing that we know about Abraham? Hi, Tina. Welcome to the class.
That's okay. I'm sorry.
That's okay. We're trying to start as close to 12 as we can, and we will all do the best we can, considering the lives are complicated, especially in these days of sheltering in place and so on and so forth. Being available to start is not an easy thing to do. So I just want to mention that that's recognized and welcome.
Thank you.
So having said all that, the first thing that we know about Abraham is that God tells him to get out. God says, you have to leave what you know. You have to leave your father's house. You have to leave the world that you are familiar with and embark upon a journey, the end of which you will not know. That is the very beginning for Abraham and for us as Jews to the Jewish spiritual endeavor. It is a way of talking about what the spiritual enterprise is. It is about leaving what is comfortable. It is about leaving what is familiar and what is typically valued, and embarking upon a journey, the end of which is unknown. Now, this is not just about Abraham. This is a way of understanding the Jewish enterprise from not only from the beginnings but throughout. What is the journey that our people take from Egypt on? It is to a land of promise which they know nothing about. And when they get there, what did they discover? They discover a place that is as yet not fully formed, and their job will be to help to form it. This is what we Jews do. This is the Jewish enterprise. Now, I'm not saying this is unique to Jews, that nobody else does anything remotely like that. I want to make statements like this, and I want to make sure that you understand that I don't say them because I'm making a value judgment about anybody else's traditions. I'm just describing what Judaism is about, and if there are connections or similarities to other traditions, that's terrific. But that is not the focus of this class, and I'm not going to feel I have some obligation to explore every other form of spirituality that might exist in the world, or which might be useful or important or meaningful. There's plenty of that, and the sad thing is that for the Jewish community as a whole, we know a lot more about those methods of spiritual life than we know about our own. So I'm going to focus on what Judaism offers us, and I'm going to leave it to you to find affinities between that and any other spiritual traditions you may be familiar with, or that you might practice, or whatever it may happen to be. Okay, so what I'm saying in large measure is that Judaism, from its beginning and even today, is about the unfolding of a journey whose end is not known. That is what Jewish spiritual life is. Now, I say that and on one level it sounds very simple. Well, of course it's not known. But it's not so simple, because it changes the way we see ourselves, and it changes the way we see our world, to recognize that its meaning is something that is uncovered, or discovered if you prefer, and exploring things to reveal that or to discover that progressively is what we are called upon to do. So as Jews, not just in a spiritual mode, but in terms of identity, our commitment is to live in a world that is indeterminate. It is open. Its end, except in very broad terms, is not known, and by definition cannot be known. What I'm saying is that there is meaning in the fact that life is open-ended, and that we are required to embrace that open-endedness. Our job as human beings and as Jews, as our tradition envisions this, is to be engaged in this ongoing process of uncovering what is already there in the world, but which is hidden from us. The fact that it is hidden from us and that we have to uncover it, is the essence of why we're even here. The point of Jewish spiritual life is not to be given a set of principles that reveal what is true, or that express what is true. It is the process of discovery of a whole variety of truths, which may be contradictory, or may be complicated, or may be only dimly perceived, or may be clear at some times and not so clear at other times. It is this lack of determination which marks for the Jew what the process of spiritual discovery is. And this is something that begins with the first Jew. And we are, as we pursue this, we are pursuing an ancient path that has been trod by many before us, but which we lost track of for a variety of reasons. Now, I don't want to go into detail here. This is not a class in history. It's not a class in modern philosophy, but there are all sorts of reasons why this thread of discovery became hidden from us. And if you would like to talk about that offline, I'd be glad to talk about that with you. But I don't want to get bogged down in the weeds here, okay? There are all sorts of ways to understand how it is that we lost our own spiritual tradition, or we missed it, or we misplaced it, whatever term you'd like to use. What has happened in recent times is a rediscovery of the need to connect with this for a whole variety of reasons. That's why there are 18 people signed up for this class, which is, for me is a lot. If I have 6 or 8 or 10, that's pretty typical. But there are 18 people signed up, and it's a testament to the fact that there are so many people who feel a gap, something that is missing from their lives, and it is their hope that this can be something that they can find. And the reason we're doing the class is, although it is not obvious to everybody, it is possible to discover this missing component within our own tradition and within our own history and within our own texts. And there's a reason to do this. The reason is there is another level of connection when we see our spiritual discipline or our attempt to develop our spiritual life and to connect that to who we are historically, where we have come from, who we are in the world, all of those kinds of things. I'm not saying you can't find it elsewhere. You can. If you want to be a Buddhist, that's great. And Buddhism has a terrific history and set of texts and so on and so forth about spirituality, and has a very deep and wonderful discipline about it. There's nothing, I'm not making any kind of negative judgment about that, but what I'm saying is that to the degree that you are not, how do I put it? It is helpful to find this kind of possibility within who you are historically, within where you come from, not by adopting some other tradition, however meaningful and helpful it might be, but discovering within your own tradition what there is as a source of support for this kind of endeavor. It adds a level of meaning, a level of significance to the enterprise, which would not be there otherwise. That's why there is such responsiveness to this topic and why I'm interested in teaching it. I think there's real value in approaching the issue of spiritual discipline, spiritual discovery, spiritual truth from within the Jewish tradition if you're a Jew. If you're not a Jew, you might still come to some useful conclusions about that. That's why I have a website that's called everybodyneedsarabbi.com, because I think there's stuff within the Jewish tradition that is of value to people who aren't Jewish. And my job on the website is to help people to discover that, because it might be useful to them in their own lives. They don't have to be Jewish. If they are, that's fine. If they're not, that's fine. It doesn't matter from my point of view. But the Jewish tradition may have something that speaks to folks who are part of some different tradition or no tradition. That's one thing that I do. But this class is not about that. This class is about speaking to folks who are interested from the standpoint of discovering within Judaism what are the spiritual resources that can be connected to. Okay, so let me stop here for just a minute, since I've sort of laid out the general purposes of the class, and see if anybody has a question that they must ask, and I will be glad to respond to it. Anybody have a question that is just bursting from their hearts to put out on the table? Anything like that? Hi, Judith. Yes. Okay. Yes, Tina.
No, I was waiting at Judith.
Oh, you're waiting. Oh, waiting at Judith. Okay. Okay. Great.
I do have a question.
All right.
Are we using any kind of a book?
are we using any kind of book? You know, this is a Jewish class, and the idea that we don't have a book that we're going to read and discuss is like, how is it possible? and the answer is that there are books. Look, there's a whole literature on that relates here, and it's called Mussar, which means correction or ethics or something along those lines. And there are some wonderful books on Mussar, which we could adopt as the text, and we could study some books by Alan Marinus or people of that sort, and then we would learn what Alan Marinus thinks. That would be fine. That would be very valuable. It wouldn't help us as individuals, I mean, except insofar as he prescribes some spiritual disciplines that, and other people prescribe some spiritual disciplines which we can adopt. And we'll talk about them, and you may find it useful to adopt one or another of them, and that would be great. At the same time, the class is not a class in the philosophy of Alan Marinus, however interesting that might be, or any of the other writers of contemporary Mussar literature, or not even contemporary Mussar literature. We can go back to Saadia Gaon in the 11th century and read his book Emunot V'Deot, meaning beliefs and ideas, which some people would say would be the beginning of the Mussar movement. A wonderful philosophical text, and we would learn what Saadia Gaon thought about what was important in spiritual life that might or may not be directly helpful to us. What this class is about is that we're going to draw on history, we're going to draw on philosophy, but it's not a class of history or philosophy. It's a class about what are the elements of spiritual life, spiritual development that Judaism sets forth for us. How do we connect to that? How do we pursue that using whatever sources or whatever background might be available to us? So we're going to start from something that should be, in a way, obvious. That is, there are 18 very well-known midot, meaning qualities or characteristics. There actually are more than 50, but these are the most important ones, and they're the ones identified by a number of different contemporary writers on what's called Mussar literature, the literature of character and correction and so on and so forth. And we're going to look at that list and use that as a jumping off point for a discussion of what life might be like if we were to follow the ways in which Judaism sets up the structures, the understandings that Judaism sets up for pursuing spiritual development within ourselves as individuals, and even more broadly, as members of a community. So you should also have received a list of these 18 midot.
Would you like me to show them?
Yeah, sure. I think that's a good idea. Thank you, Kim. So we're going to start with this list. Now, again, I want to make sure that it's clear. This is not a class about the philosophy of this list. Okay, the list of midot is a list of qualities or characteristics that all human beings have, and which comprise the human being. And they are seen in the Jewish spiritual tradition as being part of our souls. They're part of gifts. They are gifts that we receive as part of the soul from God. We could start off with something that is probably pretty well known in the beginning of the morning service. You know, Elohai neshama shenatata bi tohorahi. God has has given me a pure soul. This is an everyday event. Now, we're going to understand what that means for being given the soul as an everyday event. I mean, why isn't it just once and for always? But it's not. It's a gift that occurs all the time. But that soul, whatever we're going to understand it to be, and it's a complicated idea, which we're just using a term for now, is composed of a number of different qualities called midot. And here is a list of the most important. And it's worth paying attention to them. What are these midot? They are humility, patience, gratitude, compassion, order, equanimity, honor, simplicity, enthusiasm, silence, generosity, truth, moderation, loving kindness, responsibility, trust, faith, and yirah, which this is a list that was compiled by Marinus, and he's reluctant to translate yirah. He says, though English translation is accurate, a close association is with fear or awe. And that's actually a pretty good translation. It is the sense in which maybe even a better translation is the term that is used by a modern Jewish philosopher, Abraham Joshua Heschel. And the term is wonder. One sees in the world and in oneself the idea, things that require the response of wonder. I'm not sure. I don't understand why Marinus doesn't use that term. Maybe he doesn't like modern Jewish existential philosophy, but I do. Okay, so if you want to substitute wonder for fear or awe, which sometimes have negative associations for modern human beings, feel free. So these are qualities that are part of every human soul, including yours and mine. And these are all ways in understanding what makes up who we are as a gift from God. Now, I don't want to present this in a way that will lead some of you to say, gift from God? What is he talking about? Is this some kind of a strange theological understanding which is anti-rational? It is not. It is simply to say that as we are constituted as human beings, there is a number of qualities that all of us have that are fundamental to our identity and to our activity as human beings. Here's a list of 18 of them. And what is important to bear in mind here is that they are not all positive. Humility is not always a positive thing. Sometimes it could be a negative. For example, if it's false humility, or for that matter, there are times when you might have to assert being proud of something in order for it to be effective or meaningful. Humility is not always a positive thing. Same thing with patience. Same thing with gratitude. All the way down the list, they are all both positive and negative. The issue that we will be pursuing, and which Mussar, the literature of character and spiritual development directs us to, is the fact, as I was indicating before, that these things are open-ended to a certain degree. They are not stable in the sense that humility is always one thing. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it can even be its own contradiction. The same thing is true with regard to faith or loving kindness or any of these other terms. Alice, are you still there, or did we lose you? Okay, we lost Alice. I wonder if there was something I said. Okay.
No, I'm here.
Oh, okay,
And
good.
3-year-olds
I didn't want, I hope I
had
didn't
an
say
issue that
anything
maybe
that
3-year-olds
was,
couldn't handle.
okay, all right, good, good,
I
good.
just had to wander out for a second. I'm back. I'm back.
All right, I'm glad you're back. Thank you very much for sticking it out with me. So we start from this idea that each of us has a fundamental self, which if you want to call that soul, you can call it soul. If you want to call it identity, you can call it identity. I don't really care. I sort of feel like I'm in the realm of, you can call me Jay and you can call me, that old thing from Saturday, not Saturday Night, from Laugh-In. I don't care what you call it. There is some fundamental element that is which is the basis of who we are. And this element is not one thing. It is not always the same thing. It would be nice, I guess, in some ways, if it could be more stable, but it's not more stable, because as it turns out, and as we will learn and we will explore in the Jewish spiritual tradition, the lack of stability, the openness of these ideas is what makes them useful. It makes them meaningful. If what you thought we were going to do in this class was to come up with one or another basic idea, and this is what Jewish spiritual life is, you will be disappointed, because that is not the nature of the Jewish spiritual enterprise. It's not even the nature of the Jewish enterprise. Being a part of the Jewish tradition means embracing paradox. This is one of the things I've taught many times in many different contexts. It is not that we are called upon to find out which of the terms of a paradox is the true one, or which is the right way of understanding any of these midot, any of these qualities, what is the truth of any one of them, but they are all, if you like the term, multivalent, okay? And that is either something that we are willing to accept and to work with, or not. And if you're not, that's fine. There are plenty of ways to be in the world that are different. But if we're looking at this from the standpoint of what Judaism has to teach us about spiritual life, I think that that's a basic component. That's my understanding, for better or for worse. And I'm the teacher, so I get to say that. So I think that in the end, you will find it a useful idea. And I think you'll find it a useful idea because it tracks with our experience. What do I mean? I think it is not the case, as a general rule, that in our lives we find some kind of inline, univocal set of meanings about who we are and what life is. We constantly come across experiences which make us aware of the fact that it is not possible that life is so simple. It is always more complicated than we think, and not just more complicated, complicated in a particular way. Not particularly complicated just because it's confused, but complicated because its meaning is found in the engagement of contradictory terms of a paradox with each other. Where do we find truth? It is in the area in which the different elements of paradox are enmeshed with each other. That's something that either makes you feel really nervous, as it does for some people, or you might think, I've been looking for that kind of idea a long time, because it is the way that life occurs to me, and finally somebody is talking about the life that I experience. Well, and maybe it's something else altogether. I think that is the way many people experience life. It is the way I experience life as well. And understanding how it is that embracing paradox is the essential stance that Judaism requires of us, that human personality, for that matter, requires of us, is something that is so basic to who and what we are that we often just sort of glide right by it. And we want to say, well, which of those things is really true? And the answer is not that they're true, one is true one time and one is true the other time, or that one is true and the other is less true. That's not the way it is. They are both true. They are both radically true. And what we find most helpful is the way in which these truths engage with each other and give us an opportunity to engage with life in a different way. Kim is pointing out that we are at the end of our time.
No.
Oh no, I'm
No,
sorry.
I had a question.
Oh, okay. Well, ask your question, please.
No, we have 21 minutes.
Oh, okay, good.
Now 20. But in terms of an example of the paradox, it seems one that I think of as God loves you, and yet sometimes stuff happens in your life that doesn't indicate that God loves you.
Sure, that is a very good example, and I'll go you one, maybe not better, but in addition. The Torah teaches, hate evil and love what is good. Excuse me? Hate evil and love what is good. First of all, how do you know what's evil and what's good? And how is it that hate and love are both things that are commanded to us? What I'm saying is that the way things, from my limited point of view, is the way things are is that hate and love are both part of a midah, both part of a characteristic, and sometimes it acts in one way, and sometimes it acts in another way, but they are not simply one is true and one is false. They are both true, and they engage with each other. What is reality about? It is about the fact that hate and love are enmeshed, and you can't pull them apart, no matter how hard you try. So if the point of spiritual life is to recognize that, then our job in pursuing a spiritual life, I'll get with you in a second, Alice, hang on, is not to discover which of those is true or what element is true and what element is false, but to understand that what we are called upon to do is to embrace the reality that these seemingly contradictory elements or qualities are both fundamental. And we can't, not only can't we avoid them, but our job is to embrace them. Okay, Alice.
Okay, so I don't know like how many people in this group know this, but there's an entire therapy modality dedicated to that concept.
Mm-hmm.
And it's called DBT, Dialectical Behavioral Therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And I know this because my child did an entire 6-week course on it, and I had to take the parent classes.
Yeah.
And the entire concept is you have to hold two things that seem contradictory true at the same time. And it's really, really hard.
Yes.
That's why they push it for
I think, in what you're saying, Alice, there's tremendous amount of truth.
Especially teenagers who have like depression, they'll feel like I am working as hard as I can and I'm still unconscious. And the thing is, it's true.
Your voice is kind of fading in and out, Alice. I'm sorry. I don't know what's going on. Kim, do you have an understanding what this is?
But
No, but I'd be glad.
maybe tomorrow you could do better. So you might be working hard. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know.
I'll give you another example, Alice.
But yeah,
I am.
But yeah, I just wanted to say, that's a really true statement, and it's so true.
Yeah.
That people do therapy to like an example.
Yeah.
Like, I am working as hard as I can in math, but I still can't pass this class.
Okay.
It's still not good enough.
Yeah.
Those are true statements.
Yes.
Like, I am doing the best that I can, and I am still not good enough. But that doesn't mean you're not going to be good tomorrow.
Well,
Like,
it's
you
interesting that you
can do
say
better.
good because
Like, so
there's
kids
another
see that.
possibility.
They
Fail
see
is
that,
another
and they're
possibility.
working as hard as they can, and it's not good enough.
Yeah.
And they feel like, we'll never be good.
Well,
Yeah, but like what they feel like is, and like another one they give is like problems with your parents, right? Like, do you feel like, I can't say anything right to you because you will always like object to me, and the parents are saying no, right? Like, you have to see your parents' point of view is correct and your point of view is also correct. Like, but you guys are just not, you know what I'm saying? Like, if you have a fight with your kids, sometimes you are correct, and also their point of view makes sense from where they're standing. Both
Yeah.
of those things can be true.
yeah.
Both you and your parents can be making true statements, and you can still not be in agreement.
Well, that's true, and I
Like,
think
you know this if you ever had a fight with your spouse. You are saying something that you are sure is true, and they're saying something that they know is true, and you're still not agreeing with them.
yeah. I just lost the screen somehow. I don't know
Like,
how I
anyway.
did that. What did I do
Sorry,
here?
sorry.
Here, go to the bottom and click on the Zoom icon.
Okay, I'm looking for it. Zoom icon.
The blue and white.
Hold on.
It looks like a camera
Okay, I'm looking for it. I don't see it so far.
where your icons are at the bottom.
Oh, you're talking about, all right, I didn't understand. Yeah. Okay, here we go. All right, excellent. Thank you, Kim. I think that you have pointed to something that is fundamental for us to talk about. And it is one example, but it's not the only example. I'll give you another example that I find really personally helpful and meaningful to me. I am very interested, and have been interested for a long time, in Gestalt therapy. And I admire Fritz Perls, the founder of Gestalt therapy, very deeply, even though my own therapist doesn't think much of him. And the reason I admire him is that if you're familiar with Gestalt therapy, what you know about it is that you approach your own therapeutic endeavor by identifying different voices within yourself that emphasize different aspects of your life and who you are and so on and so forth. And the point is not to come up with some super voice that encompasses all of them, but to recognize that these voices, these elements that define who you are, have their own integrity. They have their own identity. And the job of the individual and of the Gestalt therapist is not to have you lose out on these identities, but to understand them and how they interact with each other. So this is another example of what you're suggesting, Alice, the idea that experience or meaning is more complicated than one idea or set of ideas that are that exclude any kind of things that make for lack of coherence. But that's not what we are taught in Western thought. We are taught that when we encounter paradox, our job is to figure out how to make the paradox disappear. Which of the terms is true? Is there a supervening idea or value that would reconcile these seemingly antagonistic or contradictory ideas? The stance that we are encouraged to take is to resolve paradox in such a way that the paradox itself disappears. I I think this is what most of us do most of the time, but I think it's not really very helpful. And I don't think it's really very consistent with what Judaism, from a spiritual point of view, teaches. And that's why, for example, if I'm reading Torah and I'm reading it with somebody else and they say, how can it be that the Torah teaches this, but it also teaches that? How is it possible that God can do this, but God also does that? How is it possible that there are so many contradictions in the text, in our way of seeing and understanding God, a way of understanding our lives? Isn't the point to find some sort of coherence? Isn't that the point of Torah? And the answer is no, it's not. The point of Torah is to embrace all of that contradiction, because that's the way the world actually is, and that's the way the world actually works. And the text, whether it's the Torah or the Midrash or whatever, reflects that complexity. It doesn't run away from it. It doesn't try to simplify it. It doesn't try to resolve it in some ways. It says, yes, and. Now, if you come from the Western philosophical tradition, this makes you crazy. Or it can make you crazy. And I'm sorry about that, but it's not my fault. I think embracing this contradiction is what we are called upon to do, and we are called upon to do it from the very, very beginning. When God creates the universe, what does God say? There was evening and there was morning the first day. There was dark and light, etc. And the story or the literature about creation starts out with this very idea that that creation inherently encompasses a series of opposites, a series of contradictory terms. That is essential in understanding the basic reality of the world. Could it be the case that God could have recounted a story of creation which was not filled with contradiction? Sure. It would be called something else. It would be called something, but it wouldn't be called Judaism. What we are asked to do is to look at it from the very beginning, from the very point of inception, to see the ways in which the world is based upon contradiction, paradox, etc., etc., etc. And it is our engagement with that and the constant unfolding of that, which requires us to be involved in it, that is the point of creation from God's point of view, insofar as anybody can say that they understand it. Well, why are we here? Not because everything is coherent. If everything was coherent, what the heck would God need us for? We are the sand in the oyster. We are the element that creates an ongoing process of that underlies an ongoing process of creation, and we are not asked to resolve that. We are asked to embrace the fact that what comes out of that is a bunch of stuff that is contradictory. That is the nature of creation.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Evening and morning, I don't see those as being contradictory because they're sequential. What seems to me to be contradictory is how you can have evening and how you can have morning before the sun is created.
See, you're doing exactly what it is I'm telling you not to do, Stan.
All right.
You are doing exactly, trying to resolve the apparent contradiction or apparent paradox through logic, and there's nothing wrong with that. It just ain't Jewish spirituality. It is a philosophical system. That's my point exactly. Okay, don't misunderstand me. I'm not making any kind of negative judgment about it. But what I'm saying is that it is so ingrained in us to take this kind of approach, to say, okay, how can I make this statement coherent? How can I remove the tension of paradox from this statement? And you know, on a practical level, we have to operate in that world. You know, this is the world of what Buber would call the I-it. This is about analysis. And there's nothing wrong with it. It has its own truth. It has its own value, and that is excellent and wonderful. But it is not what he would call I-thou. It is not a holistic understanding of the way the world works. It's a way of understanding how the world works by taking it apart and trying to put it back together again in a different way so that it makes more logical sense to us. And there's nothing wrong with that. Buber teaches that as well. There is a tremendous value in that. It's just a different way of knowing than to know things in the I-thou way, in a holistic way, where you embrace contradiction and paradox. Okay,
I think Wynn had a question too.
Oh, I'm sorry, Wynn. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I'm just wondering if, as we go away for a week before we come back together, if
Yes.
there's some practice we can do this week that you would recommend to either fit with that notion of paradox or no paradox, something for our awareness that we can do this week, if that makes any sense.
It makes a lot of sense, and it is a great question. And there is a whole literature that you can connect with. If you go online to the Mussar Institute, you will find a list of books that explore this idea. And that's one way of approaching it. I mentioned an author who I like a lot. I'm sorry, well, I didn't see the sign. It went away before I got a chance to read it. Was there How to Improve Your Character Within a Jewish...
That's all I got. Context.
A Jewish context, yes, that's exactly right. And that's part of what I was saying at the beginning, Tina. You know, there is a way of understanding spiritual life within an authentic Jewish context, and that's partly what we are engaged in this class. But it's not the only thing. You know, if you look at Midrash, and if you've studied Midrash with me, as some of you may have, you know that when I teach texts like this, whether it is a Midrashic text or the Torah text or what have you, the point is that it's not enough to say, okay, here is the teaching. There isn't the teaching. And it isn't even that there are many teachings. The teaching, insofar as there is a teaching, is that we are engaged in a process of peeling back the layers of the onion. And, you know, we can recognize that it's an onion. That's helpful. That's what Stan wants us to do, and he's right. That's what we've been taught to do, and that has tremendous value. But that's not all there is to understanding that it's an onion. There is the understanding that somehow it is significant that the onion has layers. And it's not just because we can peel it back, it's because it's essentially an essential part of the onion that it has layers. Am I being clear? Embracing the complexity of spiritual truth is more than just adopting a philosophical position, however valuable that might be. And please understand, I am not being critical of it in any way, except to say that it has its own validity, and it is not the same as the validity of what Judaism teaches is spiritual life. Jewish philosophy has always, from its very beginning, been an attempt to explain Judaism in the context that Gentiles will understand, going all the way back to the classical Jewish philosophers of the Middle Ages, Maimonides and so on and so forth, to adopt a philosophical language which will allow people who are not Jewish to connect to what Judaism teaches. But that's not all that Judaism teaches. That's what it teaches in the context of how is it that we explain who or what Judaism is and who or what we are to people who don't know us, or don't know the tradition. What kind of language can we use that will connect with the language they already have? And that's valuable. It's not the same as Jewish spiritual life. And we have, for a variety of reasons, not seen that distinction clearly. That's one of the reasons why this class, to my mind, has tremendous value. Not because Maimonides is not somebody we should pay attention to. We should, but we should understand clearly what's the enterprise that he's involved in. And it's not the same as the enterprise that the Torah, sets out for us. Yeah. Well, okay. So does that make sense to anybody? Yeah, Judith is nodding her head, and I appreciate that.
Well,
Win, okay. Yeah, Judith, what do you want to say?
Judith is muted.
You're muted. That's a new experience for Judith to be muted.
okay. What Reb Zalman Schachter Shalomi said. Am I still muted?
No, you're fine.
No, but you're kind of
I
fading
have
in.
a sign saying, okay, I've unmuted myself. You have unmuted me. I think it should work. So that life and we is like a diamond, and at different portions of our lives, different facets shine.
Yes.
And it could even be different parts of our day.
Yes.
Different facets shine. And I liked that explanation because it's paradoxical, and it suits me.
Yeah, I think it's a good analogy, a good metaphor. There are a number of metaphors that are very useful in this area, and that's one of them. I hadn't particularly heard that from Reb Zalman, as people like to call him, but it's a good example. It had it's 101. Okay, see now Kim is actually telling me it's time to stop. So that Kim is my timekeeper, and I don't know what I would do without him. And you should appreciate him, because otherwise you'd be here forever. Okay, so just as a very quick final comment, diamonds are what they are because they have facets. But I want to point out that diamonds don't naturally have facets. Diamonds have facets because we human beings cut them. Diamonds have facets because we shape them in such a way. Our being involved in the process of creating diamonds, which have facets, is indispensable. And this is part of what I think sometimes gets lost. It's not that there is some sort of spiritual truth out there, and all we have to do is find it, and there it is, and that's the end of the process. The process is, well, it is a process. We have to cut the diamond. We have to cleave the diamond. I like the idea that we use the word cleave with regard to diamonds. And it is the complications that we cause, which is the indispensable part of the process. That's why we are here. That's why God creates us, so to speak, whatever language you want to use for that. That's what the significance is of our being around. Otherwise, who needs us? No. So this is one point to begin with. We're going to go on to other points later on. What I want you to do between now and next week is you will notice that in the material on the Mussar Institute website, there is an outline of what the Mussar enterprise is. What are the parts of the day? What do we do day to day, hour to hour in pursuing Jewish spiritual life and development? There's a short little page along those lines that you will find. And that's what I'm going to ask you to read for next time. And I want to thank you all very much for being a part of this class. It's been, I hope you've enjoyed it. It's been a real pleasure for me to teach it. And I'm looking forward to next week. I hope you are too. All right. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
I left already.
He's gone. What did the rabbi, Kim, what did
Yes.
the rabbi send to you besides that list of qualities?
Oh,
And
did you get the email with the 4 different links?
Yeah.
That's all I have, but
Is it on one of those links?
I don't know. The last thing he spoke of, I don't know if, so I will ask him and I will send that out.
But you didn't get anything from him yourself?
I don't have anything beyond what I sent you earlier, like last night. Okay, thank you. Nice to see you.
Nice being with you. Thank you.